The fire took my home, but it wasn't the fire that left me homeless. I remember the smell before I saw the smoke. It crept in under the door, bitter, heavy, wrong. For a second I thought maybe it was from the old woods, but then came the sound, a low, hungry roar. The kind that makes your skin know before your mind does. When I opened the hallway door, the air itself seemed to push against me. Black smoke rolled toward me like a wave. I coughed, shouted for help, though I knew no one would answer. It had been just me for the past year, since Walter passed from that sudden heart attack. Just me, and the house we'd built with our hands 30 years ago. The wallpaper he'd chosen was curling, melting, blistering before my eyes. The photographs on the wall shimmered, caught between flame and memory. My knees shook as I stumbled toward the living room, where the curtains had turned to a sheet of fire. I could barely see, I could barely breathe. Somewhere in that heat, I heard glass shatter. My throat burned as I shouted Walter's name. Old Habitus. If he could still come running from the shed like he used to when something broke. But the only answer was the groan of wood giving way. Then came the sound of boots. A crash. A man's voice yelling through the smoke. I remember arms around me, strong, urgent, lifting me off my feet. I didn't fight him. I didn't even have the strength to. The air outside hit my lungs like a knife, cold and cruel. I collapsed onto the grass, coughing, my nightgown soaked in sweat and smoke. Red lights flashed across my face, the kind of light that doesn't comfort, only reminds you that something has gone terribly wrong. The man's name was Evan Rowe. He was young, with soot on his cheeks, and eyes that had already seen too many nights like this. "You're safe, ma'am," he said, though the word safe didn't mean anything anymore. Behind him, the house screamed as the roof caved in. The noise was deafening, the sound of 30 years of love, laughter, and small arguments turning to dust. I covered my face, but I couldn't block the smell. Burning fabric, scorched paper, melted paint, it all fused into something I'll never forget. Someone handed me a blanket, though I didn't feel cold. I only felt empty, a kind of cold that starts inside the chest. I clutched the only thing I had managed to hold on to, a framed photograph. Edges cracked, the glass cracked like a web. Me, Walter, and Grant, smiling in the backyard one summer afternoon. That photo was all I had left. Everything else gone. Evan knelt beside me, asking questions I couldn't answer fully. Where was I when it started? Did I have family nearby? But my thoughts were ash. My words came out in fragments. It was the kitchen. I was making tea. The stove must have sparked old wiring, maybe. He nodded gently, like he understood more than I could say. Later, the investigators confirmed it. Faulty electrical in the kitchen wall. An accident, they said. No one's fault. When the flames finally died, dawn was already beginning to wash the sky gray. I watched as they dragged out what was left of the furniture, twisted metal and blackened wood that once held our life. At that moment, I thought the fire was the worst thing that could ever happen to me. But I hadn't yet heard my son's voice. The morning after felt unreal, too quiet, too clean. The world should have mourned with me, but the birds still sang as if nothing had happened. I sat on the curb outside what used to be my house, wrapped in a borrowed coat that smelled faintly of lavender. The ruins still smoked in places, whispering like they weren't done telling their story. My fingers were gray with ash, trembling as I sifted through the debris beside me. All I found were fragments, the edge of a plate, half a teacup, the brass hinge from Walter's old toolbox. Every piece I touched seemed to dissolve, too fragile to remember me. June Halberg from next door appeared with a thermos of tea. "Clara," she said softly, kneeling beside me, "you need something warm." I tried to smile, but it broke halfway. The cup shook in my hand, ripples forming on the surface like tiny echoes of the night before. We sat without speaking for a while. I could feel her wanting to say something kind, something hopeful, but words never stand a chance against loss that fresh. When the firefighter Ivan walked up the drive again, I stood automatically, my heart kicking in my chest. He held something small in his gloved hand. For a moment I thought it might be another piece of nothing, another scrap to burned to matter. But when he placed it in my palm, I almost dropped it. My wedding ring, burnt around the edges, blackened, but still whole. The metal was still warm. I pressed it to my lips, not caring that it left a smudge of soot. "Thank you," I whispered, but he just nodded, his eyes wet around the edges. After he left, I stared at the ring for a long time. Walter had slipped it on my finger 42 years ago, in a church filled with wildflowers. He used to say it wasn't the gold that mattered, it was the promise. Now it felt heavier than ever, like it carried every memory we'd built. I whispered his name, Walter, and for a heartbeat, I swore I could feel him beside me, telling me to stand tall, to breathe, to keep going. That's when the woman from the county arrived. Dana Kearns, social services, a clipboard in one hand, concern in her eyes. She crouched in front of me and spoke in that careful, practiced tone that people use when they know you've lost everything. Mrs. Wynne, she said gently, we'll arrange temporary housing, but it might take a few days. Do you have anyone you can stay with? The question hung in the air like smoke. My throat tightened. I thought of Grant, my only son, the boy I raised through scraped knees and sleepless nights, the man who now lived 2 towns over, busy with his family, his job, his life. His daughter Nora is 6 now, full of energy and questions. I hesitated. Then, quietly, I said, yes, I'll call my son. The words sounded brave, but my heart trembled, because even as I said them, something deep inside me already feared what he might say in return. I never knew words could burn worse than fire. The morning light felt harsh on my face as I sat at June's kitchen table, her phone trembling in my hand. I'd rehearsed what to say all night, polite, brief, unburdening. I wouldn't cry. I promised myself I would simply ask for a few days, maybe a week, just until I could find somewhere to go. When his name appeared on the screen, my heart leaped in the same old way. For a moment, I saw him as a boy, again messy hair, freckles, a smile that always came easy. I pressed call. It rang twice. Then, hey Mom. Relief washed over me. Oh Grant, thank God you answered. I didn't know if he cut in, his tone calm, almost careful. I saw the news about the fire. That's really awful. The way he said awful, like it was just another headline, made my throat ache. I'm all right, I said softly, a bit shaken, but I'm alive. That's what matters, right? A pause, then faint sounds in the background, a child's laughter, the clink of dishes, a woman's voice. Elise. Grant sighed. We've just got so much going on. Mom, you know, Nora's been fussy with her school starting. Elise is exhausted, and the house is chaos. I smiled through the sting. I remember those days. You were the same always, curious, always moving. I used to read to you for hours in that old chair. Yeah, he interrupted again, the words tight. Listen, I wish I could help more right now. It's just not a good time. The phrase hung there, not a good time. I stared at the floor, the pattern of June's linoleum blurring through my tears. I wasn't asking for much, sweetheart. Just a few nights. I can sleep on the couch. I'll be quiet. I don't have anywhere else. Silence. Then, muffled Elise's voice. Tell her we'll call later. Grant lowered his voice. Mom, Elise thinks well. She's worried it might be stressful having company right now. Nora's still adjusting to her routine. Company. That word landed harder than smoke in my lungs. Grant, I whispered. I'm not company. I'm your mother. He didn't respond right away. I could hear him breathing, maybe struggling with something he didn't want to feel. Finally, he said, Mom, it's just not a good time. Okay, we'll figure something out soon. Maybe check with insurance, they should cover a hotel or something. The fire had roared, his words only whispered, but somehow, they burned deeper. I nodded, though he couldn't see me. Of course, you're busy. I understand. He exhaled, relieved. Thanks, Mom. I'll call you later. All right. The line clicked before I could say goodbye. For a long time, I sat there with the phone against my ear, listening to nothing. Outside, the sun glared bright and cruel over the ashes of yesterday. I thought I had lost everything in that fire, but the truth was, I was only beginning to understand what loss really meant. And I still believed, foolishly, that he'd call back. He used to run into my arms. Now, my own son won't open his door. 2 days later, I stood on Grant's porch with a smoke-stained suitcase and a hopeful heart that didn't know when to quit. June had offered to let me stay longer, but I couldn't bear the pity in her eyes. A mother shouldn't have to beg for space in her child's world. The neighborhood was neat, quiet, trimmed lawns, tidy mailboxes, pumpkins on porches waiting for Halloween. I imagined Grant mowing the grass, Elise watering flowers, little Nora running barefoot through the yard. It looked like the kind of peace Walter and I had always wanted for him. I rang the bell. Through the glass, I saw movement. Elise appeared first, her posture straight, Nora peeking from behind her leg. She opened the door halfway, just enough for her perfume to drift out, light, citrus, nothing like the smell of home. Clara, she said with a tight smile. We didn't expect you." Her voice was sweet, but her eyes flicked toward the street, scanning to see who might be watching. "I know, dear," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I just thought I'd come by, maybe see Nora. I won't stay long." Behind her, Nora's voice piped up. "Grandma." Elise shifted. "It's just not a great time. Grant's at work, and Nora's about to have her snack before nap." I nodded, forcing a small smile. "Of course, I only wanted to drop this off." I held up a small box, the last unburned photo I had of Grant as a boy. "Thought she might like to see what her daddy looked like once." Elise's smile faltered. She didn't reach for the box right away, but eventually took it. "We'll call you, Clara, once things settle." Her hand lingered on the edge of the door. I stared past her into the warmth of that house, my son's laughter echoing faintly from the walls I would never stand within, though Nora's curious eyes met mine for a brief moment. Every instinct in me wanted to step forward, to remind her that I'd once held that boy through fevers, heartbreaks, dreams, that I'd once been his home. But I didn't move. The door clicked softly shut. The sound was small, but it broke something inside me. I stood there a moment longer, suitcase at my feet, the autumn wind tugging at my coat. Then I turned, walking back down the path as the world blurred through tears I couldn't stop. That night, June laid a blanket over me on her couch. She didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. In the dark, I whispered to no one, "Maybe he really doesn't need me anymore." But even as the words left my lips, I wished they weren't true. I wasn't ready to be a guest in a world I once built. June's house smelled of cinnamon and comfort, the kind of warmth that comes from years of kindness baked into the walls. She'd prepared eggs and toast that morning, insisting I sit down even though my stomach wasn't hungry for anything but silence. "Clara Wynne," she said, setting a cup of tea in front of me, "you're not leaving here until you've got a roof of your own. No arguments." I smiled faintly, though my heart ached. Pride is a heavy thing to swallow, especially when you've lived your whole life being the one who offered shelter. "You've already done too much," I told her. "I don't want to be a burden." June shook her head. "You're not a burden. You're my friend." Her kindness filled the room, but so did the quiet, the kind that makes you realize how much space grief takes up. Every time the kettle whistled, I thought of the one that melted in my kitchen. Every night, when the floor creaked, I half expected Walter's footsteps. 3 days after the fire, I walked back to the remains of my home. The police tape fluttered in the wind, yellow against blackened earth. I stood behind it, afraid to cross into what used to be mine. The chimney was still standing, a lonely monument of brick and memory. Around it, the air smelled faintly of wet ash and rain. I could almost hear Walter's laugh echo in the distance, that deep, kind sound that used to fill every corner. He used to say, "Home is where love lives, Clara, not just where walls stand." But standing there, I couldn't find love, only loss. A car slowed nearby, strangers staring through windows at the old house that once hosted Sunday dinners and birthday songs. I turned away, clutching my coat tighter. The world had moved on already. I hadn't. Later that afternoon, social worker Dana came by June's kitchen again. She had a folder tucked under her arm, and that same tone, professional but gentle. "Mrs. Wynne," she said, "we've got a room available at a temporary residence in town. It's quiet, clean, safe, and about the insurance, they've approved a payout for rebuilding, but it'll take time to process." The word temporary stung more than I expected, but the insurance news offered a sliver of practical hope. I nodded, stirring my tea, though it had gone cold. "I appreciate that, truly. I just need a bit more time to think." Dana studied me carefully. "You don't have to do this alone." "I know," I said softly, "but I've been independent all my life. I don't know how to be anything else." When she left, June touched my hand. "You're allowed to rest, Clara. Even strong women need somewhere to land." I looked out the window toward the gray sky. The world felt foreign, unfamiliar, like I'd been evicted not just from my house, but from my life. And though I tried to be grateful, deep down I still felt like a guest in a world that used to be mine. In a pile of ashes, I found the one thing the fire couldn't take: love. It was late afternoon when I returned to the ruins one last time, with permission from the investigators now that the site was cleared. The air was still damp from last night's rain, the ground soft beneath my shoes. The world was quiet, except for the distant hum of a passing car, and the call of a lonely crow perched on the fence. I walked past the melted remains of what had been the porch steps. The smell of smoke still clung to everything, stubborn, unyielding, like grief itself. I didn't know what I was looking for. Maybe closure. Maybe a reason to stop coming back. My eyes swept across the debris until something caught the light, a faint glint beneath a layer of soot. I knelt, brushing away ash with trembling hands. It was a photograph. Half-burned edges curled like petals. In it, I saw Usmi, Grant, and little Nora at age 3. We were in the backyard, Walter behind the camera, sunlight in our eyes. My hair was windblown. Grant's cheeks were smudged with dirt, and Nora's tiny hand reached toward me. The fire had devoured so much, but somehow our faces survived. I held the photo to my chest, feeling the weight of every moment it captured. It wasn't just paper. It was proof that someone still connected us. For a while, I just sat there in the soot, the wind tugging at my hair, the sky heavy with gray, and for the first time since the fire, the ache inside me softened, if only slightly. That's when I heard footsteps, crunching on gravel. Mrs. Wynne. I looked up. Evan Rourke stood a few feet away, helmet tucked under his arm, his uniform dusted with ash. He looked different in the daylight, less like a hero, more like a man carrying the weight of what he'd seen. Didn't think anyone would be out here, he said gently. I wanted to say goodbye, I replied. He nodded, stepping closer. You know, we sometimes find strange things after fires, things that shouldn't have survived. I've seen books, toys, photos, little miracles. I held up the picture. This one did. Evan smiled faintly. Then maybe it means something. We stood there in silence, two people surrounded by loss but somehow still standing. He looked out over the ruins, then back at me. Maybe it's time to rebuild, he said. Not the same wall, somewhere new, somewhere that feels like yours again. The insurance will help with that. The thought scared me, but it also stirred something I hadn't felt in weeks. A flicker, small but steady, hope. I looked down at the photograph again, the image blurred slightly by tears. The fire had taken my house, my things, even the closeness of my son. But in this small, charred piece of paper, I saw what still remained: love, memory, and the chance to begin again. I slipped the photo into my pocket. Maybe you're right, I said softly. And for the first time since that terrible night, I believed it. The world had taken everything I owned, but it hadn't taken my heart. It was a small room, beige walls, thin curtains, a narrow bed pushed against the window, but it was mine. Dana stood beside me as I unpacked a single suitcase, her voice gentle as always. You'll be comfortable here, Mrs. Wynne. Meals are served downstairs at noon, and there's a garden out back. The word garden caught me. It had been so long since I'd smelled earth that wasn't burned. After she left, I sat on the edge of the bed and listened to the hum of the heater. It was quiet, but not empty. For the first time since the fire, I didn't feel like a guest. I felt placed. The first few months were strange. I woke every morning expecting Walter's voice, or the kettle's whistle, or even the echo of loss itself. But instead, I found rhythm. The staff smiled when I passed. The neighbors nodded in the hallway. The insurance process dragged on, with paperwork and assessments, but it gave me time to grieve. When Dana told me about the volunteer program at the community center, I hesitated. I don't know if I have anything left to give, I said. She smiled. Maybe that's exactly why you should go. So I went. The center smelled of crayons and soup, the kind of warmth only people create together. I helped serve lunches, folded donated clothes, and listened to stories that mirrored pieces of my own. There was Mr. Keller, who'd lost his wife to time, and Marie, who came every day just to talk about the son who never called. Somehow, in helping them, I began helping myself. Months passed, and one afternoon, a letter arrived in the mailroom. The handwriting was uneven, looped, a child's scrawl across a pink envelope. The return address made my heart jump. Grantstown. Elise had helped Nora send it, I later learned. Inside was a drawing, a stick figure woman with gray hair, smiling beside a smaller figure holding a flower. Dear Grandma C., it read, I miss you. Mommy says you're resting, but I think you're brave. I love you as big as the sky. Love, Nora. I traced the crooked heart she'd drawn in red crayon. My throat tightened. Each month after that, another letter came. Stories about her school, her dolls, her daddy's jokes. Sometimes, she'd tuck in a dried flower or a sticker. Small gifts from a little girl who didn't understand distance but understood love. Elisa's notes were brief at first, polite updates, but they grew warmer over time, mentioning how Nora asked about me often. Those letters became my morning prayers. I'd read them before breakfast, whispering replies she'd never see. Feeling the warmth return to places I thought were forever cold. The world had stripped me bare, but somehow, through a child's love and the kindness of strangers, I was learning how to live again. Sometimes, after the ashes, the heart dares to glow again. It was Thursday afternoon, the kind of day that smells faintly of spring trying to push through winter. I was sorting clothes at the community center when a familiar voice said, "You fold faster than the rest of us." I looked up and there he was. Evan Rourke. He stood in the doorway, clean-shaven this time, his smile, easy but shy. For a second, all I could see was the night he'd carried me out of the fire, the glow, the smoke, his steady voice. Now, in the soft light of the center, he looked like something steadier than rescue. "Evan," I said, surprised, "what brings you here?" He shrugged, lightly. "Just checking in. Dana told me you've been volunteering. I wanted to see how you were doing." I laughed an actual laugh, one that startled even me. "You mean, making sure I didn't burn down the soup kitchen?" He chuckled, shaking his head. "Something like that." We sat together over coffee in paper cups, the kind that never quite cool. He told me about his long shifts, how he'd been thinking about leaving the department soon. "Too many nights like yours," he said softly. "Too many losses." I listened, realizing how much I'd missed the sound of honest conversation, the kind that doesn't rush, doesn't pretend. When he asked how I was, I hesitated, then pulled from my bag a small envelope. "Beta," I said, handing it to him. "Because of these," he opened it carefully, pulling out one of Nora's letters, the one with the crooked heart. He smiled. "Your granddaughter." I nodded. "She writes with her mom's help. Smart girl, reminds me of Grant at that age." Evan studied the drawing, then looked up. "You raised a good one." The words hit deep. No judgment, no pity, just truth. I felt a warmth spread through me that wasn't embarrassment, but something gentler. Like being seen again. "Thank you," I whispered. Sometimes I wonder if I failed him somehow, if maybe that's why. Evan stopped me gently. "You didn't fail anyone, Clara. You loved them. Sometimes people just forget where they came from, until life reminds them." We sat in that small pause between sentences where understanding lives. For the first time in months, I wasn't thinking about what I'd lost, but about what could still grow, maybe even something more fragile and beautiful than that. When he left, he said, "I'll stop by again next week if you'll let me." I smiled, the corners of my heart warming. "I'd like that, Evan." As the door closed behind him, sunlight spilled across the table, catching the edge of Nora's drawing. And in that light, for the first time since the fire, I felt the quiet, certain truth my heart was still capable of glowing. Love has a way of finding its way back even when doors stay closed. It was raining, that soft, whispering kind of rain that seems to cleanse the air, but weigh down the heart. I was folding blankets at the community center when Dana called out, "Clara, you have a visitor." I turned and there was Elise, holding Nora's hand, both in matching raincoats. Nora's eyes lit up the moment she saw me. "Grandma," she cried, running forward, shoes squeaking against the linoleum. I dropped everything and knelt as she threw her arms around my neck. Her tiny voice trembled against my shoulder. "We came to see you." I held her close, my chest aching with both joy and surprise. I looked up at Elise, who offered a tentative smile. "Nora wouldn't stop asking," she said quietly, "and I thought it was time." "Oh, sweetheart," I murmured to Nora. Sometimes grown-ups forget that love isn't meant to stay locked up. We sat in the kitchen afterward, the three of us. I made cocoa with too much sugar, the way Nora liked it, and together we baked cookies, the kind with chocolate chips that melted like secrets on the tongue. Flour dusted her hair, and she giggled when I pretended to sneeze into the dough. "Grandma," she said between laughs, "you're the only one who makes cookies taste like hugs." That was when I realized she wasn't here just because she missed me. She was here because she remembered, and Elise, watching us, seemed to soften with each shared laugh. We sat by the small window, watching the rain trace soft rivers down the glass. I told Nora stories about the old days, how her dad used to help me in the garden, how he once cried when his kite broke. She listened with wide eyes, as if trying to rebuild the father she knew from the one I remembered. Elise chimed in occasionally, sharing her own memories of Grant. Then Nora pulled out a little phone from her coat pocket, her mom's. I realized. "Can I record you?" she asked shyly, "for when I go home." I smiled. Of course, the video was simple, no filters, no edits, just us, sitting close. She hit record and said, "Grandma, you're my home." The words struck something deep, something that trembled and healed all at once. Later, after they'd eaten half the cookies and packed the rest for the road, I walked them to the car. The rain had softened into mist. Nora turned back before getting in and waved with both hands, her pink raincoat bright against the gray. I didn't know then that Elise would share our moment, the little video message on her social media, where it spread through friends and family like light finding cracks in darkness. Within weeks, it had touched hearts in our small community. But even before others saw it, I already knew what it meant. Love had found its way home. Forgiveness isn't forgetting, it's freeing yourself from what can't be rebuilt. A month later, I was tending to the garden behind the center. The marigolds had started to bloom again when Dana called out softly, "Clara, you have a visitor." I turned on. There he was, Grant. He looked older, thinner, not the confident man who'd once shut the door in my face, but a son stripped down to truth. His hands were buried in his pockets, rain clinging to his jacket. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said quietly, "I saw the video Elise posted. It went around our circle." My heart thudded. "The one with Nora?" He nodded. "People kept sharing it, asking if it was my mother." He swallowed hard. I was embarrassed at first, ashamed, but when I watched it, He stopped, eyes glistening. I realized I'd pushed away the only person who ever truly stayed. I said nothing. The silence between us was heavy, but not cruel. It was the kind that waits for courage. Finally, he spoke again. "I was scared, Mom, scared of needing you again, scared that if I did, I'd never stop." His voice cracked. "And then the fire happened, and I didn't come. I told myself you were fine, but I knew I was lying." Elise and I talked after that visit. It made her see things differently too. I stepped closer, studying the face I'd once kissed goodnight 1,000 times. "You never stopped needing love, Grant," I said softly. "You just tried to live without it." That broke him. He covered his face with his hands, shoulders shaking, and in that moment, he wasn't a grown man anymore. He was my boy again, the one who used to run to me when thunder scared him. I reached out, my hand trembling as it rested on his arm. "Some fires," I said, "burn what we don't need anymore." He looked up, confused. "The pride," I continued, "the anger, the walls we build when we're hurt." I smiled faintly. "Let them go, son. What's left, that's what was always meant to stay." He stepped forward and hugged me, the kind of embrace that erases years. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. I closed my eyes, feeling the truth of it. "I know," I said, "and I forgive you." Not with weakness, but with grace. We stood there for a long time, the garden around us whispering with wind. When he finally pulled back, I saw something in his eyes, peace, fragile but real. "Come by again," I said, brushing a leaf from his shoulder. "Your daughter makes excellent cookies. Maybe next time, we'll all bake together." He smiled through the tears. "I'd like that." As he walked away, I looked toward the horizon, the same direction their car had disappeared weeks before. The sky was clearing. The world felt lighter, and for the first time in a long, long while, the door to my heart and my home was open again. Home isn't made of wood and walls, it's made of forgiveness. A year had passed since the night everything burned, yet somehow, the woman who had once stood in the ashes now stood surrounded by warmth. My little apartment, the one I'd been afraid to move into, was finally alive, furnished with pieces from the insurance payout and donations. Light streamed through lace curtains, catching the soft edges of family photos that lined the shelves. There were flowers on every surface, daisies from June, lilies from the center volunteers, and a small potted rose bush that Grant and Nora had brought over to brighten the place. That afternoon, the doorbell rang. When I opened it, there they were, Grant, Elise, and little Nora, holding a tray of cookies still warm from the oven. Nora ran in first, her laughter scattering like sunshine. "Grandma, we made your cookies this time." I bent to hug her. "And did you remember the secret ingredient?" She grinned love. Elise stood behind them, her smile genuine now. I could see it in her eyes. Something had softened over the months. The visits had become regular, the conversations deeper. She'd even confided in me about her own fears of family, how the video had sparked changes in her too. "Thank you for having us, Clara," she said quietly, and I believed she meant it. Grant looked around the apartment. "You've really made this place yours," he said. "I tried," I replied, setting tea on the table. "It turns out, a home doesn't have to be big to feel full." The afternoon was easy, full of small, precious things. Nora showed me her school drawing, a house with 3 figures and a garden full of flowers. Underneath, she'd written, Grandma's new home. Later, we drove out to the old property. The ground was still scarred in places, but in the middle of the blackened soil stood a new beginning, a memorial garden. Rows of marigolds and wildflowers, planted by volunteers, surrounded a small wooden sign that read, "From ashes, love grows." Grant knelt to plant another seedling beside it. Elise joined him, her hand brushing his. For a moment, the world felt whole again. As I stood watching, I noticed a familiar figure at the gate of an, now a friend who visited often for coffee and talks. He gave a small wave, his easy smile warm as ever. "You kept your promise," he called out. "You rebuilt." I smiled back. "Maybe not the same house," I said, "but the same heart. Join us sometime." He nodded, tipping his cap. "I'd like that." The breeze carried the scent of earth and blossoms. I closed my eyes and whispered, half to Walter, half to the wind. Maybe I didn't lose everything that night. Maybe I found who I really am, and for the first time since the fire, I truly believed it. If you've ever been burned by life, this is your sign to rise again. Now it's just me and you. If you've stayed till the end of my story, thank you. I suppose what I really wanted wasn't just to tell what happened, but to remind someone, maybe someone like you, that even when life takes everything, it can't take your heart. When the fire came, I thought I'd lost it all. My home, my safety, even my place in the world. But I was wrong. What I lost were things. What I found were truths. I learned that sometimes the people we love will hurt us, not because they don't care, but because fear can build higher walls than any house. And forgiveness isn't a key you hand out. It's a light you choose to keep burning. To every mother who's been pushed away, to every person who's stood outside a closed door, wondering what they did wrong, listen to me. You didn't fail. You loved it. And love, no matter how bruised or burned, is never wasted. I once thought my story ended with loss, but endings are just quiet beginnings, wearing different clothes. Now, my days are simple. I wake to the sound of birds instead of alarms. I drink my tea by the window, where sunlight touches the flowers Nora planted. Grant and Elise visit regularly now, and that's enough. I still volunteer at the center. I listen to people rebuilding their lives after all kinds of fires, some real, some invisible. I tell them, you don't have to start over where you fell. You can begin anywhere the light reaches you. If you're reading this, maybe you're holding pieces of something burned. Maybe it's trust, or family, or hope. Please rebuild anyway, because the fire doesn't win unless you stop loving. And if you ever doubt that, look around. There's always someone, a friend, a neighbor, maybe even a stranger who's willing to hand you a seed and say, "Here, start again." I'm living proof that ashes can turn into gardens. So, from my heart to yours, keep going, keep forgiving, keep believing that home isn't the place you lose. It's something you carry within you. And when you finally find yourself standing in the light again, remember, you never truly lost anything the fire could take.